There you go. Okay, so it seems like everyone can hear me. I don't see any negative replies from the chat, so I will just go on and start this. Now, I would like to welcome everyone officially to this class. This again is APNIC e-learning web class. Now, APNIC provides e-learning courses to everyone in the Asia Pacific region. It is provided for free, and you can join us on a weekly basis. We discuss a lot of different topics. For this afternoon, the topic that we are going to discuss is all about network security fundamentals. Okay, so today is the 23rd of January in 2013. From where I am broadcasting this, it's already 12:30 in the afternoon. So I probably should just say good day for everyone who is still morning. In any case, let me just continue and introduce myself first. Now, my name is Cheryl Hermoso. I'm a training officer with APNIC, and I've worked with them for the past 1 year and a half now. So before joining APNIC, I was previously a network and systems administrator for a large academic institution back at home. So I've joined APNIC and I started working with them, and together with the training team, we deliver different topics all over the Asia Pacific region. And the topics that we concentrate on are these specialties. So network security, we do IPv6 deployment, also IPv6 transition. We also do trainings when it comes to DNS and DNS security, and also some resource management topics. Now, these topics are conducted either face-to-face, so we go and to different economies, different countries, and do either 3-day or 5-day workshops. We also do e-learning type of courses, which you are now attending. Now, these e-learning courses are provided on a weekly basis. We have 3 topics that are covered at different time slots. Now, for this particular course, this is a beginner class. This is an introductory class. We will allot 1 hour for this session. Now, during this 1 hour session, we will probably save a bit of time towards the end if we have enough time for the answer and question and answer portion. However, I would like to encourage everyone to please just write your questions on the chat. Whenever you see something that needs clarification, write them down on the chat. So it's not just me who can answer your question, but everyone who is in our class. Now, just a brief reminder as well that if you have any trouble with the audio and the video, you can go and check this link. That's apnic.net/elearning support. However, I'd also want to just, I think it will be faster if you just call my attention using the chat. Some people complain towards the end that the audio is choppy on their end. However, they never told me. So if you experience that, please let me know again using the chat. Also, another reminder that there will be a brief survey towards the end. So at the end of the class, I will send you a link to the survey. It's like a feedback form where you can give us your reactions to how the training went, and also if there are other topics that you want to be discussed probably in the future. Now, also, a lot of the people in the class may have a hard time understanding if I am speaking fast. So if I tend to speak fast, can you please let me know, and then I will try to speak louder, clearer, and much slower. Okay, so that's how we will go about in this class. Now, any questions before I begin with the topic at hand? No questions. Okay, so let me just go and to the next slide. As I've mentioned, this class is an introductory class. So the background of and the experience actually of the participants who signed up for this, it kind of varies. So we will try to cater to everyone as much as possible. But this, again, is a basic course. We will look into some definitions. We will look into the core concepts of network security. What are we going to cover? We will have some basic definitions. We will look at some common types of attacks. We will see some of the security measures. We'll look into cryptography. We will see what is a public key infrastructure, or PKI. So that is the rough outline of the coverage that we are going to in this class. Now, we'll begin with the goals of information security. So basically, why are we here? Why do we need to do information security or network security? Our goal, of course, all of us, is network protection. So information security is concerned with protecting our data, protecting our information. To achieve this goal, we present these three. I think we can call it the core principles of network security, or generally the core principles of information security. It is also known as the CIA triad. I'm sure you've heard about it before. So let's just discuss these three goals so that it will refresh your minds what they stand for. So the first one is confidentiality. Confidentiality, as its name implies, um, let me just give you an example before I actually give you the definition. So when we have information, when we have data, some of these data we are willing to share them to the public. Now, there are also more sensitive information that we want to be kept private or classified. This can be information about our company, how we work, what are the procedures, also information about our clients and the staff. So these things has to be kept confidential. So when we say confidentiality, what do we mean? It basically ensures that the information that is either kept somewhere on our drives, on our computers, or somewhere on the network can't be accessed by anyone without any proper authorization. Someone has to be authorized before they can have access to the data. This means that you have some form of control access, right? If you're transferring data, how do we ensure confidentiality? It passes through the networks, passes through the wires. Now we can still ensure confidentiality there. As long as, it basically assures that the information can be read only by the intended recipient. So let's say, for example, you are sending, a message, an email from you going to your recipient. Now, that can only be read by your recipient. What if it is passing through the network? Now, if it has been intercepted, someone sniffed onto your network, possibly got that information, confidentiality, I mean, make sure that this third party cannot read the information that they got. So that is confidential. Basically, it prevents any unauthorized use or disclosure of information. The next one is integrity. Now, integrity is another word that refers to basically the accuracy and completeness of information. When you receive information from someone, it should have the same meaning as what was sent to you, right? It ensures that unauthorized users are now not just, they can't just read the information, but also they shouldn't be able to modify your information, No alteration, let's say if the data is being transited, it shouldn't be altered, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So any data corruption that's unintentional, any packet sniffing, and also like putting new information into the packets and then sending it out, like I say, a man-in-the-middle attack, now that violates integrity. The next one is availability. When we say availability, your information, your data, your service has to be available, has to be reliable, and it has to be accessible in a timely fashion by your users. This means that if you are running servers, now that has to be up and available 99.9% of the time. Now these are the core principles. Now when we look into the different attacks, when we look into the different security measures, just keep in mind that these are our goals. There are other different goals, of course, and it's more like balancing between them. We can't ensure that all of them can be kept all at the same time, but it has to be a balance out of all these goals. So why do we need security? Well, I think that's a very basic question. The internet was initially designed for connectivity. If you have a look into the internet history, when it all began as ARPANET, there was no security. There is trust assumed. That's because everyone that connects to that network, are considered secure by itself. We're basically not concerned about security then. We're only concerned about connectivity. We just want information or data or packets to be sent from one source going to another to its destination. Nowadays, the way we use the internet has changed heaps. So now we use the internet for our day-to-day transaction. We use it for paying or buying clothes, buying anything on the internet. We also use it for any bank transactions that we have. We use it for our businesses. So with that, it is only expected that we need some form of security over the TCP/IP. Now, TCP/IP is the basic protocol that essentially runs the internet. Now, we build security on top of that. Now, some of the fundamental aspects of information that we need to protect are, of course, the information that we have to keep private from everyone else, such as our confidential data. If we have any information about our business models, our employee information, okay, these are done so that we can protect the identity of our users as much as possible, and also to protect our resources. We don't want someone else, like our competitors, to have access to our business model, of course, right? So also with that, some of us might think that it might be better if we don't connect to the internet altogether. However, that's not the case. Most businesses nowadays use the internet not just as a marketing tool, but as a basic communications tool. Okay, we also provide websites where our clients can come and look at our services. So we provide online services. Also, we access other third-party organizations, other third-party services, okay, and we use them to run our businesses smoothly. So that's why we need any form of security that we can have. So when we say network security, we are concerned, of course, with securing the different layers of our network infrastructure. Okay, so here we have the network architecture. There are basically two major models that describes the nature of the network infrastructure or the network architecture. These are, on the left, you can find your OSI model. Just use there you go. And also on the right, you can find the TCP/IP model. Now, these models basically define the architecture of networks as an abstraction layer. So the one on the left, the OSI reference model, is a layered model of the network architecture. It uses these forms of abstraction layers so to subdivide the communications process in terms of what they do, like their function. Okay, so different layers have different functions, and also the protocols that are operating in each of these layers. So two types. You have its function and also the protocols that are operating on that particular layer. Okay, so we have to make sure that we know where a protocol resides so we know how to protect them. Now there, in the OSI model, we have 7 layers altogether. That's application, presentation, session, transport. So have a look there, downwards, network, data link, and physical layer. So those are the 7 layers. I will not go into the details of what each of them do, but what I'm going to do is present you the protocols that are basically running on each of them. So here you can see on the layer 2, you have your PPTP. On layer 3, you have your main IP protocols or internet protocols. That's IPv4, IPv6. When you send ping commands, that also works on the network layer. That's ICMP. Now there's another one here, IPSec. We'll have a closer look at that in a while. Basically, IPSec is also a security measure. Okay, IPSec works on the network layer. You go one layer up and you will find on the transport layer, you'll see TCP and UDP. Now, TCP and UDP are the two most common transport layer protocols. That stands for the transmission connection-based oriented protocol and the connectionless oriented protocol. So that's TCP and UDP. Now, one layer up, you have a layer 5, your Samba, NFS, SOCKS, that makes up the session layer. And of course, what we are mostly familiar with is on layer 7. These are most of the services and protocols that we basically interact with as normal users. You have DNS, you have DHCP. Okay, as systems admins also are very familiar with this because these are the services that they provide. You have HTTP, FTP, IMAP, Telnet, and also SSH and radio servers. So these are the protocols running on each of them. Now, thing is, for each of these, as you can see here, for each of these layers, there are possible attacks. Okay, so this is really what I wanted to show you. Each of these layers is prone to attacks. So here are some of the possible and common attacks. You have ARP spoofing, ping or ICMP floods. Go one layer up, you'll have TCP attacks. And then if you go to the application layer, there are heaps more. DNS poisoning, phishing, spamming, and scamming are just some of the examples. So what we're going to do in the next few slides is we'll have a look at just some of the common types of attacks, the easy ones that possibly will try and span a few of these layers. So we'll start at the bottom, then going up. So just for comparison, I forgot to mention about the TCP/IP model. So it's basically the equivalent TCP/IP protocol stack or the model is a more descriptive framework compared to the OSI model. So it has 4 abstraction layers. Basically, it's a combination of all these the other layers. So it's easier because it's meant to be more descriptive on how the data is actually formatted, routed, and transmitted throughout the internet. Okay, so let's not deal too much about it, but basically I want you to focus on the attacks, the one in the red boxes. So next, in the next slide, we'll look at one of the most common attacks. Now, I've mentioned about the TCP, okay? That where is TCP? That is on the transport layer. So here we will look at the TCP attacks. TCP, first, what is TCP? It stands for the Transmission Control Protocol, okay? It provides reliable and, I should say, ordered delivery of packets between hosts. So TCP, as I mentioned, is a connection-oriented protocol, meaning that it has to establish a connection first before it can actually send and receive packets back and forth from a source to a destination. Okay? First, you have what you call a handshake. That handshake is initiated so that it will establish a secure and say a connection before it sends the packets. Now, how do we go about the handshake? It's called three-way handshake because you're sending out 3 signals. First is, let's have a scenario. So here, when do we set up a TCP connection first? You have your computer here. This must be a host trying to set a connection-based or connection-oriented connection-based protocol TCP onto the server. So it's trying to establish a TCP connection to the server. So he will initiate it. Okay, this client will initiate the handshake by sending a SYN command. Okay, SYN stands for synchronize. So then the server will respond with another type of command that is SYN plus ACK. Okay, finally, the client sends a final acknowledgement. It will send an acknowledgement back to the server. Since both of them have acknowledged each other, now the connection is established and they can send information, send packets back and forth. Now, TCP attacks or SYN flooding is actually a type of a denial of service attack, a DOS attack. Okay, I'm pretty sure you've heard about DOS attacks before, DOS or DDoS attacks. The attacker exploits this handshake. It exploits the three-way handshake by sending a succession of SYN requests. So it's basically flooding the server. So what happens there is like this. Let me just, so suppose this host now is an attacker. So he will send a lot of SYN requests going to the server. Now the server, of course, will still reply as it should. He will reply with the SYN+ACK command. However, there is only a finite queue size of these SYN+ACK connections that he can establish. So there is a finite queue size for all those incomplete connections. So because why do we have an incomplete connection? Because the attacker will not send a final acknowledgement. So he doesn't finally send the last acknowledgement command, so the connection is not established. So you have open connections between the attacker to the server. Now, since a server can only handle a finite queue size, at one point the queue will be full, the server will not accept any more requests. But what if the request is coming from a legitimate source this time? So this is just from one attacker. What if we have another machine here that wants to connect to the server, but he cannot because the queue size is full? So that is how the TCP attack works. It looks very simple, but a lot of people, a lot of attacks like this happen every time. Okay, so next one is DNS cache poisoning. By the way, any question from that previous one? Okay, so it's that one's pretty straightforward, but as you will see later on, these attacks are not just performed in isolation. So it's not performed by itself. It usually is a combination of different attacks. So what I'm trying to show here is just them in separate, but once an attacker tries to do that, then actually it's a combination of different attacks. We'll try and look at that question later on, Subrata. Okay, now let's go on and discuss about DNS cache poisoning. So actually, I've skipped from the session transport layer going straight to the application layer. Okay, so because we don't really have a lot of time to discuss each of the layers, so I just chose a few ones. So this time, because a lot of people are asking me about this, let's discuss about DNS cache poisoning. So typically, how does the DNS work? So here you have a client who wants to access a website or a web server in example.com. So www.example.com. What he will do is go to the DNS resolver and then go ask the caching server. The caching server will act in the client's behalf and try and find out the IP address corresponding to the domain name. Okay, because that's how the packet will actually be sent. You need the address. You need the IP address of the web server. Okay, so the way DNS works is hierarchical. So the DNS caching server will go and ask the root server, okay, and then going down, it follows a tree hierarchy until it reaches the name server that is authoritative, that is in charge of that domain to give the answer. Okay, so the flow will be like this. Now, once it reaches the authoritative server, it will reply with the mapping. So it will tell the client that, hey, the IP address corresponding to example.com is 192.168.1.1. So that reply will go straight to the client, and the client can now access the web server that it is intending to here. Now, all the queries coming from the caching server actually has a query ID. That's because when it sends out these queries, they come in parallel. It's not in sequence. So he may send out a lot of queries, a lot of questions going to different different name servers. So once the answer comes back, he has to be able to tie it up with a question. So the query ID will be the same in both the query and the answer. Okay, so that's typically how DNS works. Now, what is DNS cache poisoning? Now, there is one other malicious user here, okay, that will pretend to be the authoritative server this time. He is pretending to be this server. Okay, so when this caching server sends out the request, okay, he will also reply. When he replies, he will give a wrong information. He will say that, hey, the IP address that you're looking for is actually 192.168.1.99. Okay, so he will feed that going to the caching server. Now, because he's not sure what the query ID of the query exactly is, so he will send out a lot of responses. Okay, a lot of these replies with varying query IDs. Different query IDs. However, there is an issue with the DNS that it uses query IDs in sequential form. So let's say the query ID now is 64571. You're sure that the next query ID will be 64572. So the attacker exploits that info. So he will send out replies with query IDs, okay, in succession, going back to the caching server. Now, if it matches with the query ID, sorry about that, let's go back here. If it matches with the query ID, then the DNS caching server will accept that answer, okay, and he will give the information back to the client. So now the client will talk to a wrong web server. That is typically how DNS cache poisoning works. That is the problem. It exploits a vulnerability with DNS when it's using query IDs that are just sequential. So nowadays you can you can do something about it. Just use a random query IDs. You can set that in your name servers. All right, is this clear? So every time you send out a query, it should have a unique identifier that is not just like an additional to the previous ones. Okay, so next is this one. So here I'm just basically listing down all the common types of attacks. So most of the attacks we mentioned in the two previous slides are actually a combination of these common types of attacks. So normally it begins with the first one, reconnaissance. So reconnaissance is a word that means finding systems, like just being out there and looking for possible targets. It's trying to find vulnerable systems over the internet. We can do ping sweeps, we can do port scans using sophisticated tools. And these sophisticated tools are readily available, downloadable over the internet, right? What can you find when you do ping sweeps? You can do port scans. You can also identify the host. You can find which device it is. You can easily find out the services that are running on that particular device. You can find their operating systems, okay? Once you have all that information, it's very easy to find the vulnerability that is associated with that host. So having that information can be quite scary. So ping sweeps and port scans basically identify all the services that are running on the network, okay? Make sure that, well, some people, we can't really protect our service much about it unless we do some, say, some firewalling on our networks, on our hosts. Next is what's this? Say once the attacker already has access to the network, he can easily capture packets as they pass through the network. That is sniffing or eavesdropping. It's a form of interception attack. The process is very simple, really. You just set up a sniffer. It can be a hardware, it can be a software that can perform that task. So then it will just listen to all the messages that are being sent through to the network. Now, another form of that is what we call the man-in-the-middle attack. Now, it's also a form of eavesdropping, however, it's more active. Now, sniffing is more of a passive form of attack, but man-in-the-middle is active. So he doesn't just listen, he will intercept the messages that are intended for a valid device. So if, say, you have a source, you have a destination, man-in-the-middle attack, the attacker sits in the middle, and then he gets the data being sent by your source, okay, make some modifications to it probably, and then send it to the destination. Now both your source and destination will think that they still are talking to each other, okay, when in fact the information that they are getting are already modified. Okay. Spoofing on, well, as we've seen in the previous example, it's just basically setting up a fake device that will trick us to send messages to it. So I did not have a slide, but a common example of this is ARP spoofing. Okay, ARP spoofing, or the address resolution protocol. So that happens in the layer 2. So it basically, you will try, if you will set up a fake device that will have a MAC address same as your actual destination. So your source will be tricked to communicate with that fake device rather than the other one. And then we also have hijacking, wherein it's very similar to man-in-the-middle. You're taking control of a session. And then we also have denial of service attack, or DOS, and DDoS attacks, which is just a variation of the DOS attack. That basically, generally, it seeks to make a computer or a server, a network, a service, basically anything that can be found on a network infrastructure. Okay, it can just be a sole computer, but it can also be a very large service provider network, right? So the goal there is to make that network, make that service unavailable to its users. So DOS and DDoS attacks happen almost every day for servers that are basically serving a large audience. So and they tend to send like gigabits of data, or requests over to the network that they're trying to attack. Okay, so those are the different attacks. Now let's try and look at some of the possibly the ways in which we can not totally eliminate but somehow alleviate these forms of attacks. First, let's look at trusted networks. So what do we mean by trusted networks? Well, the vast majority of networks today, when we think of security, we tend to look at it in a defensive point of view. It's like a defensive-oriented technologies. So of course, these technologies are required. But as of now, it's no longer enough to fully secure our networks. Okay? So the primary defensive technologies that I'm referring to are, of course, firewalls, or also intrusion detection systems. Firewalls, of course, will be your first line of defense from threats coming from outside the network. So when you have firewalls on your network, it's like a perimeter type of protection, okay, from anyone outside of your network. Next is intrusion detection, which can be considered as your second line of defense. So you have an IDS appliance, an IDS equipment. Okay, it can also be a software application that looks at known vulnerabilities, it looks at patterns, and then from those patterns, it can predict whether someone is trying to break into your system. Now, using these two systems, using these two technologies are okay. They're good, of course. It will make it more difficult for attackers to easily have access, or to easily basically attack your network or your internal network. But seeing it today as how attacks are getting more and more sophisticated, and attacks actually can also come from within, they're no longer enough. So some security solutions requires us to build trust on top of the TCP IP infrastructure. So we're basically integrating trust in the security infrastructure, okay? Which means that we have to take a look at these two things. Strong authentication, which is this one, and also public key infrastructure. Now, let me just look if I have another slide for the... No, I don't. So let's discuss about strong authentication a little bit. So strong authentication is an absolute requirement. I can't stress that enough. More specifically, you will need a strong two-factor authentication. So when you say two-factor authentication, it's a combination of two things or more things. So in that case, that will be multi-factor authentication. So if it's two-factor authentication, it's a combination of basically what you know, or it can be a PIN, a password, and also something that you have, a token. Now, a classic example for this is the ATM machine, the ATM card. So the token is your actual ATM card, and on top of that, you also must give or provide a PIN number, okay, when you need to withdraw your money or you need to check your balances. Now, another example that you may have noticed lately if you're using any of Google's services, Google has two-step verification wherein you can download an application. Okay, when you log into, let's say, any Google services like their mail service, you will still have to provide your username and your password. But after that, it will ask you for I think a verification code. Now that code is generated randomly and it changes after, let's say, think after 1 minute, the values changes and you will see that on the application. Okay, and then you have to provide that on the website before you can have access to your mails. So that is an example of a two-factor authentication. Okay, so maybe if you're not using that yet and if you're using their services, it might be the right time to have a look at that too, or also implement that in your own mail systems. Now, PKI, or public key infrastructure. If we want to concentrate, or if you want to deal more with PKI in a deeper fashion, it may be very hard to do that at this point because PKI spans a whole lot of other technologies. It involves digital signatures. It involves public and private keys, certificates, certificate authorities. What else? So it's not just about these technologies, but also the structure, the people. So broadly speaking, when you say PKI, it's like establishing a web of trust. You have a trusted third party that is your certificate authority. They will verify that you or anyone that they will be issuing a digital certificate, they have to make sure or verify that they're actually the right person to hold that certificate. After that, they will give a digital certificate which this company, this organization can use on their website or even their other services, okay, so that people or clients who want to access them will trust them because it has been authorized by some trusted party called the certificate authority. So that is public key infrastructure, or PKI. Now, an implication of, like we've talked about a strong authentication in the previous slide. So an implication of having authentication is really to try to restrict the access to our data. Okay, and that's done, of course, through access control. Now, generally, access control is the ability, you can see the definition there, it's the ability to permit or deny the use of an object by a subject. Okay, that's very general description. And say objects and subjects, it can be a lot of different things. It's not just users, it's not just people, but it can also be services, okay, or processes that are running on our machines. It can be a whole lot of different things. Now, when you say access control, it introduces three essential services, such as this. It's known as the AAA. Okay, now this is very important because if you want to have a secure authentication system, you usually would set up a AAA server. Now, let's just discuss these three services very briefly: authentication, authorization, and accountability. So when you say authentication, actually it comes with another terminology, that's identification. Okay, one has to identify himself first before he can be authenticated. Okay, identification is when one person claims an identity. So let's say I I access a web server, and then I input my credentials. I input my username and my password. That is me identifying myself. Now, the server this time will do the authentication part. That is when he will verify my identity. So he will check from his database whether I've inputted the correct username, okay, and the matching password. He will also check if I'm actually a user of that system. Okay, so before I can enter, I have to introduce myself first, and then the person in charge typically will just run through his database. It's like a checklist before he can allow me in. That is authentication. Authorization this time around will define what I can access. Like once I've logged into the mail system, what can I access? Okay, what are my rights or permissions on a system? What can I do or what can't I do? Am I allowed to edit? Am I allowed to delete files? Am I allowed to modify any of the text files in that particular folder? Maybe I'm not allowed to enter or see that folder altogether. Okay, so it limits basically my access. Accountability is what identifies what I've done while I'm logged into the system. It's like an audit trail. You can look at it as a record or as a log of the activities or say the actions that are associated with me, with the user that is logged in. Okay, so that at a later time, if somehow something happened to the system and I am to be blamed, they have a record. They know that this action was done by me. Okay, so that those are the three essential services of access control. Now going to the next slide, we'll see about cryptography. Okay, now we will definitely have another session that is focused mainly on cryptography, because cryptography is a very essential part of security, I would say. It's like it started out as an old method of, like, say, how do you make messages undecipherable so that when I send it out, it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Okay, that idea is not just that just doesn't just work for networks or for the computer systems. Okay, that idea has been used in World War. It has been used in the old age, not just in the modern times with the internet. So from that point on, you can see that there is really a very big potential for using cryptography in the security field. Okay, it has actually evolved in this complex science in the field of information security. So when we talk about cryptography, we're essentially talking about another very important terminology, which is encryption. Encryption is, from the definition that you can see there, it's a process of transforming a plain text to a ciphertext using a cryptographic key. Now have a look at that. Oh, we have three terminologies that are included in that. See, three terminologies already included in that definition. That's plain text, ciphertext, and cryptographic key. So what are those things? So basically, plain text is your original data. Okay, that's easy. You should know that. Plain text is your original data in its original readable format. Now the plain text will be transformed to a series of like a scrambled letters that if I try to read it, I won't be able to, because it's like a random arrangement of letters and characters. Now this is what we call a ciphertext. The transformation itself, or the process of transforming that from a plain text going to a ciphertext, is what we call the algorithm, the encryption algorithm. There are plenty of different types of encryption algorithm, DES, 3DES, Blowfish, many others out there. But basically, for someone to do that, he doesn't just rely on the algorithm. He also needs a key. Okay, so the cryptographic algorithm is public. Okay, it is known by everyone. But to be able to do that, he needs the cryptographic key, and that key has to be kept private. Depending on what type of cryptography you're using, okay, you can only, like, say, kept one as a secret, or you can have one that is public and another one that is private. Now that I'm referring to symmetric and asymmetric key here. Now when we say symmetric key cryptography, basically that means that you are using one key to both do the process of encryption and decryption. Okay, let's go back, step back a bit, and because I've described encryption and decryption in this definition. So what is decryption? It's basically just the reverse of encryption. Okay, I hope that's clear. That's pretty straightforward. I just want to clarify so that everyone knows it. So when you say decryption, you're still using the same algorithm. Okay, doing it in reverse, providing the key so that you can find the actual information. This time, from a ciphertext, you will have your plain text. So that is towards when it is received on the other end. Now, I'll show you a quick diagram on the next slide. So basically, this is how cryptography works. You have a plain text here. Okay, this plain text is now going to be encrypted so that it can be transmitted onto the network before it is sent to the destination. Now this plain text goes through an encryption algorithm, and then you have your ciphertext. Now if you want to do decryption, let's say once it reaches its destination, okay, you'll do decryption algorithm here, okay, using the decryption key, and then it will be transformed to the plain text. Now this plain text in the destination has to be the same as your plain text in your in your source. Okay, so when you say symmetric key cryptography, the keys actually are the same for your encryption and for your decryption. Okay, that's why in the previous slide I said that you're using a shared key. This shared key must be in essence transferred or shared with your destination. So both of you will be able to, the destination will be able to decrypt the message because he has the same key. Okay. Now the process in which how to transfer that key will depend on the process you want to do it. But essentially it has to be kept private. Only the destination, or if you have many destinations, then all of them must also have this shared key. Okay, that is symmetric key cryptography. Now, what are some of the examples? I'll give that to you in a while. Let's have a look at asymmetric key cryptography. Now, asymmetric key from its definition is pretty much the same as symmetric key. The difference between them mainly is the use of the number of keys. Now, this time around, we are using two keys, a public key and a private key. A public key will be published, anyone can see it, okay? And a private key will be kept by the either the one who created that, or hang on, let me just have a look at this. Okay, so basically the private key has to be kept private at all times. The reason it's called public key cryptography is because it's using this one, the public key. Okay, so when you say symmetric key cryptography, it can also be called a shared key or private key cryptography. When you say asymmetric key cryptography, it's also called a public key cryptography. Now, what are some of the uses? What are some of the examples where we use cryptography? What do you think? There are many instances, of course, but let's three common ones that I want to share with you are digital signatures, message digests, and of course, public key infrastructure, okay, which we have somehow discussed in a previous slide. Now, what is a digital signature? Let me just double check if I have a slide for that. No, I don't have one, but I'll just quickly define what it is. A digital signature is like a stamp. So in essence, it's the digital equivalent of your actual signature. Okay. However, let's say in your actual signature, you sign the same thing on every document that you want to sign. In a digital signature, the signature that is attached on every mail that you sent will be different. Okay. That's because you don't want that to be copied or cut and pasted from one message and then cut to another message. Then it will seem that let's say that email still came from you. Okay, so that's the main difference between an actual signature and a digital signature. But in essence, it's like a stamp. It's like your actual signature that can be used to authenticate or sign a document or an email. Okay, an example of this is if you're using PGP. A message sender creates a digital certificate. Okay, a PGP is like, it's a software that you can use to create your digital signature. It will compute the hash. It will create, let's say, a message digest. Okay, then it will create the digital signature. Okay, and then it will be created using the sender's private key. Okay, so once it reaches the other side, once it reaches the destination, it has to be decrypted. This time around, that destination will use the sender's public key, okay, to actually decrypt the message, so it knows that it came from the actual source. Now, the other one that I was telling you about is message digest. Hashing or message digest, it's very common in fingerprinting. It can be used in checksums. Familiar examples that I can think of right now is, let's say, when you're downloading ISO files. The source actually publishes the hash equivalent for that data. Now, a message digest is the same length, however big the source is. Okay, it doesn't change. The hash value is always the same. Now, it will only change if, let's say, what you downloaded is altered somewhere in transit, or it can be corrupted. So that's how you verify whether the ISO that you downloaded is the same, or it has not been altered, it has not been corrupted while it is being downloaded from its actual source. Okay, some hash functions that you're probably aware of or familiar of are MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256. So those are examples of some hash functions. They are used to create hash or message digests. Now here is public key infrastructure. I'll just quickly talk about it because I mentioned this earlier. So PKI, as I've said, is a combination of a lot of different things. It can be hardware, software, even people, organizations. It also includes policies and procedures. So the main goal of PKI is mainly to ensure or enable the users of a public network, the users of the internet essentially, to securely exchange data, as I would say, using public and private cryptographic keys. Okay, so we're using asymmetric key cryptography with PKI. Okay, the basic element of a PKI is the digital certificate. So a certificate authority will issue and verify this digital certificate. It signs them using the public key. And then other components of a PKI, of course, are the registration authority. It's like a repository of all the certificates that has been distributed that's available to the public. Okay. In essence, basically, it is using a third party, a certificate authority that will vouch for the authenticity or for the identity of a particular organization. So that is public key infrastructure. Any questions from the class? No questions? You seem very quiet. No reactions whatsoever? If you have any, please write them down in the chat, okay? Now here, you've seen this before. You've seen this when we started the class, right? This basically shows you the different types of attacks. Now, I wanted to direct your attention to this, to the blue ones. In previous slides, you've seen the attacks on each of the layers of the OSI models. Now, some protocols have actually been already devised to counteract, counter-mitigate these threats. To name a few, you have their 802.1x, you have IPSec for the IP layer, you have SSL, TLS in the transport layer. You can also have secure HTTP, DNSSEC, PGP, and many others, of course, in the application layer. So think if we still have time, we don't have as much time, so we'll just quickly go through um, some of the security measures. One of the most important ones there is, of course, VPN. Are you aware with VPN? So VPN basically is when you have a virtual private network. In the early days, large organizations, when they want to connect, let's say they have a main office and they have one or two or several different regional offices, they want to connect to these regional offices. Okay, so you like have a separate web that only these regional offices and the main office can connect to. They use leased lines at that time. Okay, however, leased lines are very expensive. So why not just use the internet but still have a secure connection among them? So that's how VPN came to be. VPN, or virtual private network, it creates a secure tunnel. However, it passes through a normal public network. Say you create a tunnel by either you encrypt or encapsulate the data as it is being transmitted through to the VPN or across the VPN. There are different VPN standards developed in a span of time. The first ones are PPTP. It was developed by Microsoft. It's commonly used to secure dial-up connections. So if you've heard about PPTP in the older days, when we're still using a lot of dial-up connections, then it uses PPTP. So you set up secure connections from your home networks going to the service provider networks using PPTP. Now, around the same time, there was another company that's developing a similar protocol. This time they call it L2F, or the Layer 2 Forwarding Protocol, that is being developed by Cisco. So these two protocols, PPTP and L2F, are actually being developed at the same time. So later on, when IETF created the standard, it basically just combined these two. So it became L2TP, or the Layer 2 Tunneling Protocol. So these first three standards operate on the data link layer. Now, another form of VPN is IPSec. Now, this is a very common one that we're using now. So, IPSec, or the Internet Protocol Security, it's the IETF's open standard for VPN implementation. It operates not on the data link layer, but this time around it operates on the network layer. Okay, so it's commonly implemented on the routers. Okay, so layer 3, okay, network layer. So you basically implement that on routers, and you don't have to worry much about doing that on different hosts. IPSec is so yeah, we're operating here, right, in this layer. Okay, IPSec here, it provides layer 3 security. What else can I say here? Basically, it can provide protection either from one end to another end node. It can provide protection from one network to another network. There's essentially two types or two modes in which IPsec can operate. It's called tunnel mode and transport mode. We don't have time to discuss them in detail, but essentially when you say tunnel mode, you're encrypting the entire thing and you're creating a bigger packet. When you're using transport mode, you're only inserting like another header, which is the IPsec header. So in tunnel mode, your data packets tend to become bigger. So it's essential that when you're creating this, just make sure that the maximum MTU size of your network going upstream to your service provider perhaps must be must take this into consideration. You have bigger packets being sent through to the network. Okay, these are the different components. Again, I will not go into the details of discussing them. So it requires another 1 hour, possibly even more, to just discuss that. IPsec in itself is a very complicated, very complex suite of protocols. It's a combination of these different protocols, which is security associations. It can have authentication headers, encapsulating security payloads, and internet key exchange. So there are two phases actually when you're implementing IPSec, and it uses these components separately. Okay. So I think I'll leave it at that. Do you have any questions on IPSec? I'm going to do another session. We're introducing just IPSec, so we'll have one whole hour to discuss about this. So just look out for that class in our list of schedules if you want to attend that too. Okay. Let me move on to the next. Vikash was asking about some flood attacks. However, I don't think we'll have enough time to do that. I've pretty much had time to discuss two types of attacks earlier. So if you want to know more of that information, I can probably share with you some of the slides. I'll look for it, but please send me an email, and then I'll have a look around if I can send you more information about it. Okay. This one I'll just discuss very briefly. This is layer 4. So we've discussed about layer 3 security earlier with IPSec. We go up one layer, we'll go to layer 4, transport layer. How do we secure this layer? We use TLS or SSL. TLS and SSL are essentially one and the same thing. TLS is the IETF standard. Okay, it succeeds the SSL. So SSL basically, once it reached SSL 3.0, it became standardized, and then once standardized, it was called TLS. So if they are used together or interchangeably, then actually they're referring to the same thing. Now, when you say SSL or TLS, basically encrypts the segment of your network connection above the transport layer. Okay, so it operates on the transport layer with the goal of encrypting basically encrypting anything that is above the transport layer. So as you can see here, that's why it is being used with some of the let's say in combination with some of the application layer protocols. You've heard about secure HTTP before, or HTTPS. Okay, it's a secure implementation of HTTP. It uses SSL or TLS to encrypt the communication part and secure the identification of your web server. Now, the trust here is based on an inherent trust using certificate authorities. Remember when we mentioned about certificate authorities earlier in public key infrastructure? It uses that same type of trust authentication. Okay, it uses CAs. Now, most commonly seen this in the application layer, such as, of course, in HTTPS, in web browsing. It can also be used in emails. It can also be used in secure VoIP. And if you've heard about SSH, it also can be used with that. Any questions? So finally, this is our last slide. Some basic operational security thoughts. So I just would like to end on a big note, like some do's and don'ts for you to think of when you're like say trying or thinking of implementing some network security measures for your own systems. So just keep in mind that network security is let's say it's a very it's just a small part of a very big information security plan. Okay, when you create a plan to secure your networks, it's not okay to just have it as a one-time, well-designed infrastructure. It's not like that. Every day, vulnerabilities are being discovered. So just make sure that at some point in time, you have regular intervals of, let's say, checking whether this process is still functioning well for you. Okay, as an organization, it is the role or the responsibility of everyone, from your sysads to the users to the CEOs, to keep the security. Okay, you must have a well-defined policy structure all entities in the organizations must adhere to that. Okay, we must also develop, let's say, a comprehensive information security policy. So when you say policy, these are aimed at informing your users, as well as, like, it's like laying out a baseline for your security. Now, once you have that policy in place that has to be adhered to by everyone, now you can set up standards. So when we say standards, it can be like the use of specific technologies in a uniform way. Let's say you're using this kind of equipment for your network, you're using these types of routers. Also, if you're using from the host side, if you're using, say, the same antivirus, same email software and all that, now that means that you have a standard in place. And so it just typically improves efficiency. It's easier for you to secure. It's usually mandatory, so it's easier to accomplish any consistency and uniformity all throughout your system, your network. With passwords, make sure that you specify password rules. With users, make sure that if a user is no longer part of the company, then they will be removed from the company. Those things. There are easy ones, really, but most of us just forget how to do it, or sometimes we just don't care. Um, we must also set some guidelines for our users, because not all of them, I'd say, have the same standards as everyone else. So make sure there are guidelines for them to follow. They are not mandatory, but they are like best practices that can be followed. And of course, your organization must have a disaster recovery and attack mitigation plan. This is part of your big information security plan, of course. Okay, so there's another one here, which is the WHOIS database. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the WHOIS database. If not, we have another session that discusses about this. But basically, the reason I included WHOIS database in this slide is because the WHOIS database is a public record. It contains all the network resources. It's like a listing of the number resources, the IP addresses, the allocations and assignments, and all the contacts that are responsible for all these resources. So that is a very useful set of database. How is this useful from a network security perspective? When you get attacked, you have a tendency, of course, to find the source of the attack. Once you have the IP address of the source, then it becomes easier or more manageable. You can use the WHOIS database to find that information. Okay, and then once you have that, you know who to contact, you know who to reach, or ask about the issues. So that's why those databases here. It's a very useful tool that network administrators have been using for a very long time now. So if you have resources, make sure also that they are updated so that any abuse with that resource, they know to contact which particular person or which particular email address to send the queries to. All right, so I think I'm going to end there. We've extended for about 10 minutes. Are there any questions that is answerable in a couple of minutes? I encourage you to send me please an email if there are things that you want to clarify. I have one question earlier that I don't think I have answered yet, but I will send you a message nonetheless to answer that. If there is anything that you want to discuss further, please let me know. So I will end there. I will send you the link to the survey. So if you can please answer that for me, that will be really very good. Okay, so this is the link to the survey. If you can please just fill it up really quickly. It won't take a lot of time. Also, if you want a copy of the slides, it can be downloaded from our FTP page. Now, I won't give the link to the FTP here, but after you filled out the survey, you will automatically be redirected to the FTP, and there you can download a PDF copy of the slides, not just for this particular session, but also for the other sessions that we have for the day. So all these 3 sessions. So, all right, I think I'm going to end there. Thank you very much, everyone. My email address is cheryl@apnic.net. So if you have questions or anything, please do send me an email. Let me just find that slide for you. There you go. So that is my email address. Please do send me an email for anything that you wish to be clarified. What else do I have to say? I think I'm gonna end there. We have another session later on about IPv6 addressing plan. So if you are interested in IPv6 and you have a fair amount of knowledge with that, and you're about to do your IPv6 deployment, then come and join us in that session as well. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for taking some time to join us today, and I appreciate that you spent some time with us and you participated. Thank you, and I will leave it here. See you again next time in our next e-learning sessions. Bye.